We have to continue to cover the Donald Trump trials because I've actually tried cases in Manhattan, of course, and it's important for you to understand what's going on because, as you know, Donald Trump doesn't win in the fall. It's going to be Joe Biden, and that's probably not going to be good for gun rights. So let's talk about some other issues besides the Second Amendment because these other issues will indeed impact your Second Amendment rights. Stay tuned when we come right back to talk about the trial and the details, the jury, and the like. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of many books, including Disarmed, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. All right, so we have on Monday opening statements in the Donald Trump quote-unquote hush money trial. I just want to give you a few observations that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. I'm in a suit again because I got a lot of Fox News appearances on an ongoing basis this season. I suspect that will continue on through the election. But the big thing to keep in mind is right now we have this criminal trial in Lower Manhattan with a Manhattan jury in New York City. Alvin Bragg is indicted and gone after Donald Trump for alleged essentially a violation of lying on your business records, which is kind of weird since the Donald Trump organization business records are private, right? Nevertheless, this is what's going on there. We know it's kind of a scam, a show trial, in my opinion. But with that said, we have to analyze it because it's important for you to understand how the criminal justice system works or doesn't work as you deem appropriate. I don't think it's working when it comes to Donald Trump. And remember, what they do to Donald Trump, they would love to do to you if you support Donald Trump or the Second Amendment or conservative policies across America. So to begin with, let's talk about what's going to happen on Monday. There's going to be opening statements. I think what the Donald Trump campaign is going to do is essentially give an opening statement with a dual purpose. On the one hand, he's going to want to persuade the jury or identify what this case is about from the perspective of the jury. That's going to be very important. But I think some of the comments that Donald Trump's lawyer will make will also be the sort of thing that can be used on the campaign trail. So if I'm Donald Trump's lawyer, I want to focus on winning this case, of course, and we're going to talk about the jury in 1 second, but I'm also going to want to try to convey some themes that can then be used on the campaign trail with public statements and the like. So that's the first thing I'm going to do if I'm Donald Trump's lawyer. If the prosecution, the one thing I want to be very careful about is I want to approach this as a less is more. And what I mean by that is the worst thing that a prosecutor can do is to make promises at the start of the case at an opening statement of the jury to say, you're going to hear A, B, and C in this case. And then at the end of the trial, during closing arguments and jury deliberations, the government has failed to deliver A, B, and C. So it's very important from the perspective of the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, and his office, that they do not overpromise during the opening statement. So I suspect you will see a very basic, plain vanilla kind of opening statement by the government to make sure they don't get tripped up down the road. Now, here's the next thing I want you to keep in mind. Very few people have talked about this. I just talked about it on Fox News. This is a very important point that no one has really discussed, and that is the danger to Donald Trump and his campaign of a hung jury. And what I mean by this is, if this 6-week trial occurs with Donald Trump sitting in a courtroom for 6 weeks and not on the campaign trail. So you have Joe Biden out there campaigning in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Donald Trump is locked down in Manhattan. Obviously, this is not particularly fair. What could possibly get even worse is if this trial leads to a hung jury, meaning they cannot reach a verdict, either guilty or not guilty. Obviously, Donald Trump would never want it to be guilty, but it's going to be very difficult with this terrible jury, terrible situation in Manhattan. I don't know how he possibly could get a fair trial given this judge and this jury, but only time will tell. We'll see the outcome. With that said, if there is a hung jury, there's no doubt that this Judge Juan Marchand is going to, in my opinion, and the district attorney, is they're going to force that this case be retried, which means you're now going to see a retrial of this case of Donald Trump over the summer, which is going to keep Donald Trump again in a courthouse, locked down, not campaigning, not fundraising for yet another 6 weeks. So people have not talked enough about that hung jury scenario, but it's something I want you, because I'm making you the smartest people in the room, to keep that in mind. The other thing is, let's talk a little bit about this jury. Now, there's 7 men, 5 women on this jury. I've explained to you before that Manhattan is one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. There's 5 boroughs in New York City. The most sophisticated, the wealthiest, the most expensive, where all the elites live, is Manhattan, which means you have an unduly super high-end white-collar workforce of Ivy League graduates, super smart people with highly fancy degrees and highly fancy credentials. It's just the way it works, okay? Because you can't even afford an apartment if you don't have a super fancy job in Manhattan. That's just kind of the way it works. Now, This is good news theoretically. Now, none of this is good news for Donald Trump because I don't see how he can win in Manhattan because it's so overwhelmingly Democrat. There's like no Republicans in that city to speak of. So I don't see how any of this is good for Donald Trump. But there is sort of a slight silver lining, if you will. If you look at the jury pool, as I predicted, it's actually semi-sophisticated. It is not unusual when you try a case in Manhattan that the jury is actually smarter and more credentialed and successful than the lawyers and the judge in the case. And here's like an illustration of it. If you look at what's been reported, you have multiple attorneys on the jury. You've got a software engineer on the jury. You've got wealth professionals and bankers on the jury, which is positive in two ways. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be fair, but I'm saying there's positive in the following two ways for Donald Trump. One is you're going to have a more sophisticated jury pool, which is going to understand the disconnect between the executives in a company and the billing records or the bookkeeping records. And what I mean by that is it is very rare for an executive in the company like Donald Trump to have anything to do with bookkeeping entries, accounting entries, or anything like that. They're just not the same function. So the idea that Donald Trump knows what's going on in the bookkeeping function is not super high. And these jurors are going to understand this because they work in these kinds of fields where there's a disconnect between the executive officers of a company and the bookkeeping function or accounting function of the same company and the like. The other thing is they're familiar with non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. These are entered into on a daily basis in New York City like candy. Every deal you basically make has some sort of an NDA or non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality provision. So the fact that Donald Trump entered into something with a confidentiality provision is literally going to mean like, so what? Everybody does this literally every day in Manhattan. So as a consequence, I think that's positive for Donald Trump. Again, is it enough to overwhelm what I think is a totally unfair prosecution, what appears to be a very biased judge and a terrible jury pool? Probably not, but at least there is at least an argument there's a silver lining here. The only other two observations I want to make about this trial is one other problem the prosecution may have is that there's no crime victim here. Usually in a criminal case, you have someone that's testifying that I was hit over the head with a bottle by the defendant. There's the defendant sitting at that table. You don't have a crime victim here. Likewise, you don't have anybody who says, hey, they stole a bunch of money from me. I want my money back. He stole the money. None of that is here. You don't have a crime victim testifying. That is helpful for President Trump. There's no victim here. I presume that's going to be helpful, and that's something that I hope that the Trump lawyers emphasize. The other thing is, and this is another way that Judge Marchand, I think, is going to basically throw Donald Trump under the bus, is with the drafting of jury instructions. This is another geeky thing, but this is very important to understand. Anyone that's a real trial lawyer at a high level understands that jury instructions are extremely important, and jury instructions can be drafted in various ways. My fear is that this Judge Marchand, who's basically showed himself, in my opinion, to be mostly anti-Trump, is going to draft the jury instructions so broadly to define the crime so broadly that it's going to be very difficult for even an honest and politically neutral jury to find in favor of Donald Trump, because the jury instructions, I suspect, will be so biased in favor of the government against Donald Trump, it's going to be very hard for Donald Trump to win. And my guess is they want to make sure that this jury convicts Donald Trump at all costs. That's my best guess. And of course, to the extent anybody characterizes this as a campaign finance problem, that's simply stupid and absurd, given the fact that Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Elections Commission all looked at these payments associated with Stormy Daniels in this alleged deal and these bookkeeping entries and so on, and none of them pursued it. It required Alvin Bragg to take what was at most a misdemeanor case where the statute of limitation had expired, and now they turned this into some theoretical felony. I think, of course, this is all a bunch of hooey, but, when you don't control the court system in Manhattan and the left does, this is the sort of thing you get, which is why I like to teach you to also be the smartest person in the room, is to stay away from these terrible blue jurisdictions. Don't go to Washington, D.C. Don't go to New York. Don't go to Chicago. Don't go to places where the left wing controls the justice system, because you're basically going to a place that, in my view, is the equivalent of North Korea or Iran. You're not going to get a fair trial. You're not going to get a justice system. You're going to get, at best, a non-justice system or a show trial, or what I like to call judicial theater. So my advice to you is don't touch fingers with any of these absolutely terrible jurisdictions Because the last thing we want to see you in the Second Amendment community occur or have happen to you is to get dragged into these terrible jurisdictions, and next thing you know, you're being harassed or indicted or punished in some way by these terrible blue state prosecutors. You must understand that parts of the United States, in my opinion, have become North Korea when it comes to their non-justice systems, and you need to be aware and you need to manage your life accordingly to stay far away from them. In the same way you would not fly to North Korea, you would not fly to party in Russia, and you would not fly to party in places like China or Iran. So too, stay away from these terrible deep blue jurisdictions. That's just my opinion. You can take it for what it's worth. So there you have it. Hope you learned a little bit something here today about this trial. I'll try to keep you like a little bit informed, maybe a video a week or so. I'm not going to overwhelm you with Trump stuff, but I do think some of this has to be covered because you're reading about it in the papers, and I want to make sure you kind of get the honest truth from me, because I think that I know probably more about this than virtually anybody else writing or talking about it, given my experience as a New York City trial lawyer at the highest levels. So I want to bring a little of these insights to you on occasion. All right, folks, hope you learned something here today. Stay tuned for an announcement on the new book coming out very soon, and a big law review article as well. Don't forget to follow me on X at 4 Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.